Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good morning. Doesn't it seem very strange in here? They're singing Christmas songs and the holiday lights are out, and gosh, it all just started so fast. The next thing you know, New Year's will be here, and then one thing after another, and we're going to be sitting right here, just like that next year. It's Sunday after Thanksgiving. Time just moves right on. So the question is, what are we doing with it? You have got time to live. What are you doing with it? Is it the same thing over and over and over again, kind of like on a track where you just repeat? Or are you growing, and are you learning, and are you trying? Well, many of us fail to really embark upon any great objectives, especially, hi Lisa, how are you? I didn't see you there. What a surprise. Excuse me. But we don't want to try anything new because we're afraid of failing. And our entire lives have been a testament to that. When we started in grade school, we were graded, whether we were good, whether we were average, or whether we were bad. And then the grades continued to expand to A, B, C, D, F. And when the papers were hung on the wall with all the scores, if you were on the bottom, then you were not as good as everybody else. You were not as smart as everybody else. And so it gets to the point where we're afraid to step out and really try something because we're worried what other people will think. We're afraid that we might fail. And we're afraid that we don't have the capability to do what we want to do, when in essence, life is just a learning experience. And if we don't fail, if we don't have a few stumbles, it only means we're not exercising our potential quite to the degree that we should. Now, as many of you know, I was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And in Sioux Falls, I was raised in a very, very fundamental church. It was a Christian church. And some time back, I had a lady approach me. And her mother-in-law had died, and they wanted me to do a Lutheran funeral. And so, born and raised Lutheran, I thought I could do that. And I just happened to have my Lutheran prayer book that I received back in Sioux Falls. And as I was going through it, I read one of the prayers, and I'd like to read it to you today. Now, this book was given to me in the 3rd grade. At that point in time, we were old enough to read, so we were old enough to learn the theology of the church. And it was a very special gift at that time. Inside, I had written at the time, Dookie Tufty, 1510 Carter, that was our address, and the phone number, 23622. Now, wasn't that a simple little existence? That's all I had to remember. And no zip codes, no area codes, no social security numbers, just 1510 Carter, 23622. Wherever I went, whatever I did, with those 2 numbers, I could find my way home. Anyway, that's a side point. And this is the prayer that they gave to us as 3rd graders in the Lutheran prayer book. O thou great God, who art just and holy, I, thy sinful, unclean creature, come before thee in deep humility, confessing my many sins and my total unworthiness. Now, can you imagine? I remember when I first read those words, a very dark, cold, indefinable feeling came over me, and it was somewhere between fear and somewhere between stomach sickness. It just, for the first time in my life, I was faced with this idea that I was sinful, unworthy, and unclean. And that I was unfit for God's love, a sinful, unclean creature. Well, those words are meant to be taken literally. The church that I was raised in wanted us to believe in the fact that, that we were all sinners. And the doctrines, the creeds, the rules, and the regulations, were thousands and thousands of pages. And every time we violated one of the rules, it just came to our attention that we were that sinful, unclean creature. And that we were going to hell. And that was further elaborated on by the preachers, thunderous bellowing about the tortures in hell that everybody is going to experience if they don't do what the church tells them to do. And that was another very frightening experience for a 3rd grader. to be all wrapped up in this sin and devil and hell and unclean. And so how can you ever grow up thinking that you're okay? You know, as a result of religion, and you know, I'm in the business, so I guess I can criticize it if I choose. Religion has spread kind of they've spread a global epidemic of low self-esteem. I doubt seriously if there's anybody in here, there might be a few, that really feels 100% good about yourself, and even the things that might have happened in the past that you've forgiven, but just have that lightness of being where you don't drag, you know, guilt and shame and low self-esteem or negative self-reflection along with you. You know, as I grew older, by the time I was 10 or 12, the number of sins that were eligible for a violation continued to grow until they became mountainous. The trench of guilt and shame continued to get deeper until it was impossible to climb out of it, and it was just a very, very dismal existence. Now, Jesus had the same problem in his day. The religious leaders of the day claimed that all people were sinners, first of all, but also they kept adding to the laws so that everybody would violate them at some point or another. Now, the religious leaders themselves couldn't live by the laws. They were breaking them, but they turned their head to that, and they accused the people and even tried the people for breaking the religious rules. It was at this point where Jesus went to the religious leaders and he says, listen, he says, you know, life is meant to be lived, it's meant to be enjoyed, it's meant to be fulfilled, and you're putting all of these rules and regulations on the people. You're bending them over in a laborious way so that they're trudging through life. Just because you can't find the good life, you're depriving them of the good life that is rightfully theirs. And he continued to speak out on the church's overpowering of the people. Well, people started to listen. And they started to take note. They became less dependent upon the church. Some of them even decided what moral code and they were going to live their life by. And when the church saw this, they became very, very worried. They became worried because they were losing their power, they were losing their position, and they were losing the people that were the very lifeline. So they had to come up with some sort of an idea to dismiss Jesus, and they thought the best way to do it would to show him as somebody who was totally lawless, who didn't have any sort of sacred allegiance to the religion that he was raised in. And one day while he was in the temple, the religious leaders bring to him a woman, and they put her right before him, and they say she is an adulterer. And the law says that if you are an adulterer, the punishment is to be stoned to death. By this time, a large crowd of people had gathered around, and they told Jesus, here, we put her before you. You decide what to do with her. Very difficult spot. If you let her go, I mean, there's a serious violation. He could look lawless, yet at the same time, he didn't want to be responsible for her death. Well, the crowd kept getting louder and louder, and it kept getting rowdier and rowdier, and it began to pick up stones and wanted to get on with the penalty. They kept pressing Jesus for his verdict. You know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And pretty soon, Jesus said, okay, if you want to stone her, go ahead. But let the one who is without error, let the one who is without sin, let the one who is without fault throw the first stone. And silence came over the crowd, and they very slowly dispersed. He didn't condemn the woman, but he didn't condone her either. He then told the woman, he said, go and sin no more. But he knew that everybody in there had sinned in some way. Everybody in there was guilty. And what he stood up to was not so much defending the woman, but the hypocrisy that was taking place. And it was taking place in two ways. First of all, the religious leaders, were guilty of many, many sins, but they looked the other way. They considered themselves privileged that they didn't have to obey the laws. And the second thing, the adultery law said, and that if a man and a woman are caught in adultery, they both should be brought to the temple and they both should be stoned to death. Now, nothing was mentioned about the man. He wasn't there. His name wasn't even given.